Hi, you've reached the voicemail of Hannah Brett with Connect Call. Just leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks.
1 for more options.
Hi, Hannah. I'm the mum you spoke to at the beginning of the semester about my son. He was going abroad to London. I don't know if you remember, I found a bunch of vapes in his room and he said he was holding for friends. And of course, I believed him. I also thought by him going to London abroad, some of his depression would dissipate. Also, his alcohol use would slow up a bit. I know we discussed treatment options then. Things have gotten a little worse. I'm trying to get my husband on the phone with you and me so we can talk about it. My husband's not really sold on treatment, but one of their programs we discussed that we could maybe look at for him to go during his holiday break so we're not interrupting school. I really don't want to hold him back with any of his schooling if possible. If you can call me back, that'd be great.
Hi, this is Hannah Brett with Connect Call, and I am very excited about my next guest. Heather Hayes, you have not only been a great friend of mine for years, but you have, and you still are, one of the leading interventionists in the world. And it is an honor to have you on the show. And as I was telling my guests before, the reason, I wanted to do Connect Call was, and I always say this, I don't have a clinical background, but because I work in the treatment industry for a bunch of programs over the years, I have received over, many, many family calls over the years. So I always say I don't have a clinical background, but I have a PhD for picking up the phone. As I say, I connect and I collect. And over the years, I've collected some of the best providers in the world and country, and you are one of them. So I'm, again, very happy you're here. There's a big misconception about intervention, whether people think, it's just about that client or their child, but it really is an intervention on the whole family unit. And we'll talk about that. But, basically for something to change, we'll have them call you. And then I guess my question to you is, when you're first, because my work, like I said, is done, and I didn't do a great job on moving that muscle, right, to get mom to do much, which is fine. But that's why I look to you guys. So I guess my first question would be, when you do get a parent on the phone and it's like the first phone call, and I guess what are your parting words with them in hopes that to send them off with something where it will sink in that they need to call you back and maybe make that move?
So I think we have to start with the story, but then we have to start with the backstory.
Correct.
And put it all into context. So, it's really hard when a parent reaches out and picks up that phone. It's like the hardest thing they'll ever do. And it's like the last thing they want to do. And I think also part of let me tell you all my child's good attributes is because it's been so painful for parents to have this little person that they bring into the world and watch them as they grow up, 2, 4, off at school. And there's this sort of but this is a good kid. And what happened to my good kid? And, often parents don't want to feel like they're, talking about their child in a negative way. And they aren't able to see that, we all have parts. There are parts of their kids that are, loving and funny and kind and caring. And then when mental health issues come in or substance use, there becomes a new part that often acts like they don't care about the family or don't have morals and values or don't care about things like school. And so it's really, really painful. And I think parents, you're right, have a lot of this not my kid. I'd rather it be anybody else's kid. And then almost back into, oh my God, not my kid. Because they've seen other people's kids die of fentanyl. Maybe they have a family history where they grew up with it with an alcoholic parent. They know what it's like. And it's sort of like, here's this awful, awful hostage taker back again, now again in my family. And it's like that fear and pain of, oh, please, not my kid. And so I think there's a lot of not wanting to believe it. And, we haven't done a good job at a grassroots level of really educating the world, educating parents, schools about what is substance use? What's it look like? Why is it an illness? What are the signs and symptoms? So people don't really know what it is. And the internet makes it, more complicated because you go on and you Google and does my kid have it or does it not? Or everybody's got a friend that'll try and tell you what to do or not do. So there's just all this confusion. And then there's a lot
And
of,
can I just say something also? And I think there's just this, and I'm not just saying this, and please know part of what I wanted to do this show is also, not only getting those calls, but walking through my own journey with addiction, my own journey with mental health. And I'm not just saying this because I've struggled and I do struggle. It's the truth, I think, is really all addiction is, in my opinion, and I think others too, and yours, is it's mental health and trauma untreated, right? So I think it's this reframing. Like I tell parents, instead of looking at it as like this is a bad thing we're calling Heather, look at it as an opportunity. Because I swear, the only thing is I wish somebody had intervened on me much younger. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And because it's an opportunity to actually live a better life and actually look at ways of treating your mental health and trauma without having to self-medicate. And I think it's just reframing that too, which there should be an earlier intervention in schools about that as well.
right. Well, and I think when families call, when parents call and they're nervous and scared, whether they're calling you, calling me, there are a few things they want. They want information.
Right.
They want to have an understanding. Often they just want someone to listen because they aren't able, because of shame, because of stigma, they
Right.
haven't been able to talk to their friends about it, or, they're very selective in who they can share it with. And so with that, they then want understanding, information. And I think that's the place where we come in and help with some of those myths. Like I always say, I hate the word intervention, which I do, because it
Mhm.
sounds like we're going to hog tie somebody and drag them off,
I know. I know. I know.
or that it's going to be an ambush, and it isn't, and doesn't have to
Right.
be. There are a lot of different
Right.
ways to do it. And so helping them understand that, but then also, most importantly, being that piece of hope. And, it's hard because this is an illness where, if you think you've got a thyroid issue or you think you've got
Right.
on your arm, we go to a doctor and let the experts tell us. But we don't
Right.
have that as much. I mean, we have that with mental health, but it's not a go to with mental health. And so there's a lot of, again, because it's a brain disorder and we're looking at behavior, it gets difficult. So parents do a lot of like, well, maybe this is normal teenage stuff. I did it when I was a kid.
Right.
Or
Right.
maybe it's because they got bullied and maybe they did get bullied and it's a painful thing. Or maybe, so there's also a lot of not understanding and not understanding where to go, and that the first step doesn't have to be go straight to treatment. That the first step,
Right.
educating yourself, having conversations with your loved one, and really going from there and having more of an understanding of what the options are and what it looks like.
And I often find that when I'm referring a family to you guys, which I love, is it's not an immediate treatment placement situation. A lot of the reason why I'm sending uh, to Heather Hayes and Associates is definitely because I know you guys and your team are going to clinically like wrap yourselves around the family and take your time with the family, and I explained that to the family. I said, I'm referring you to Heather because it's not that you've done anything wrong or that exactly we're not going to do a snatch and grab in the middle of the night with your son. It's more about teaching you guys how to do this messaging. You know what I mean? And how to love differently. Because, I mean, when it was me, my mom just looked at me and said, get in the car, and, she was also just afraid of me dying. Right. But I think what you brought up is such a valid point, and I still can't wrap my head around it. But I always joke with my friends, my voice was never this deep. It's just been years and years and years of kind of trying to give some guidance and direction. And, like I always use the analogy. I had this dad who was an oncologist, and I would say left and he would say right, and go right. Or I'd say, let's go up and he'd go down. And finally I said to him, I was like, sir, with all due respect, if I came into your office and you gave me my treatment plan, or I was, let's say, starting chemo and feeling better. And would you allow me to stop treatment or not follow direction? I could die, right? And so this is no different. And I'm not even being dramatic when I'm saying it, it is no different. And I think, again, it's going to take more of us and more of a push with education and information. And I think also, speaking of misconceptions, a lot of times, including this mom that I spoke to, two things she had said to me. that always strikes a chord. And I get this a lot from families where they'll say, well, he doesn't want to go. And if he doesn't want to go, he's not going to buy in. And why are we going to spend the money and do all this? My response is, and we'll talk, obviously, I'm going to throw this back at you, but in my experience in 18 years, and I've put pilots, physicians, adolescents, adults, young adults into treatment, including me. No one's skipping through the doors, right? No one's wanting to do this because we're protecting our coping skills at all costs, right? The other piece is that I often get, and I want to talk about this as well, is, a lot of times I will get a mom calling where their child is maybe withdrawing or coming home and detoxing and they are in not a good way. And so they want to strike while the iron's hot because Johnny in that moment is like, okay, I'll go to treatment. And I always say to mom, today he says that, but what are we going to do about tomorrow? And then what are we going to do about him when he goes to treatment and you're not equipped for those phone calls? So again, I turn it back to you, and you're doing a lot of the kind of upfront work before any of that goes down.
Right. Absolutely. Well, it's impossible if someone's chemicals or struggling with mental health illness,
Right.
their thinking is impaired. And so if your thinking is impaired, you can't make good decisions about your life and what you want to do. So
Right.
it's really the exception that a person is able to say, hey, I want to go get help today. And then even when they do say that in moments, it's that execution, like, where do I go? What does help look like? And the follow through, which quickly goes back to, I don't really need that help.
Right.
There was a time, you spoke to this a minute ago, where, it was life and death, but it was really, not easy is not the right word, but it was, for lack of a better word, easy to say, well, little Johnny, maybe has it, maybe he doesn't. What happened is with the fentanyl epidemic is like, it is life and death. And if people wondered or said, it's not in my school, it's not in my community, it's not in my place of worship, that made it undeniable. That held up a mirror to a society that said, not in our homes, not here, and said, oh, here it is, in ways that
Right.
were painfully irreversible. And so it is, but we do know more about that. But it's still difficult for parents because we do have that myth that a person has to want treatment for it to work. And one of the reasons I love doing interventions is because I believe that people have to have some kind of pressure, either from their families, from their schools, from the legal system, from their jobs, to go get help. If you don't have pressure, then nothing's wrong, and why would you stop?
Right.
In that moment when people go, and almost everybody I know goes saying, I don't want to go. You'll see I don't have a problem.
Right.
If you can get someone to a place where they can begin to stabilize, get the drugs out of their brain, get the, whatever it is, the traumatic trigger, help with the depression and get some coping skills. Then 2 or 3 weeks in, a person
Right.
make a decision about their health and their health care, their mental health care. But you can't do it when you're impaired. And so it really
No,
is.
I joke, like, I used to say to my mom when she's like, "You're going to treatment," I was like, "I really want the treatment center, that's in Malibu with the horses and this, that, and the other." And my mom's like, "This isn't vacation," you know? And you're right. We didn't let our kids kind of pick the school they were going to, I have to say. So why would this be any different? And I think just to quickly touch on, and not hate to, and no shame to any parent today, but I think there is also a difference in parenting. Back in the day, my mom looked at me and, pardon my French, didn't give a shit what I wanted and
Yeah,
didn't care about my say in this. She was watching me die. And so she made it really easy with the leverage. She just cut up the credit cards, took away any kind of funding, and said, go to treatment. And when I wanted to walk, she said, walk. I'm not coming to get you. And I guess when that's what we now need so much more is the help from people like you to really protect and work with these families on how to do their messaging completely different, you know?
right. Absolutely. Well,
You
and
know?
first, and they have to have that understanding too. All the research shows that a person doesn't have to want treatment or be in agreement for it to be successful. And that's an important, piece of information to help families understand, that very few want that. I didn't want it when I went to treatment. But a few weeks in, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to die.
Do you think parents say that about wanting so it's more comfortable for them?
Maybe, but I also think that there are a lot of myths out there. There are a lot of people who say, well, it's not going to work until you want it.
Right.
Which there's a place for that, but it's not till you get to a place where you can think about and understand deeply what it is that you are saying you do or don't want.
Right. And even those clients I see in treatment who leave early and I did it too, be able to manipulate your parents still. I mean, I think when I realized there was nowhere to go and there was no one coming to get me and there was no car, no apartment to go home to, it forces you to dig yourself out of this and to really like surrender, And as tough as it is, that's what I see too, is a lot of families like, well, they left. And I'm like, well, did you give them a car? Did you open the door? And so that's why I think this work is so important. I do also want to touch on, and you can tell me if what you think and is, as I was saying before, addiction really is just like mental health and trauma untreated. But we will go and deal with a lot of cases now today where it's strictly mental health. And then there are the cases where they are struggling and self-medicating with substances and other things. And so my question to you is, do you approach that family and intervention any differently?
Um, it depends.
Right.
Every family is different.
Of
Every
course.
is different and individualized. If someone is in full-blown psychosis, either a drug-induced psychosis or there's no drugs there, but they're having a psychotic break, that is a different kind of intervention. You're not sitting around in a circle reading letters. You may try, but that often doesn't work, and you have to really may take several different visits with a person to get them to feel safe. It may be finding the one person that they trust the most. It may be looking at, again, if someone's unsafe, we may need to look at outside systems to help protect them in the moment so that we can help get them to a place where they can begin to think more clearly. With other, again, with other mental health issues, there are some that you can come in and do more of what you think of when you think about an intervention. I mean, when there's trauma involved, I never like to use the surprise method because trauma survivors don't like surprises. I mean, most of us don't anyway.
Yeah, I don't like a
Surprise has
surprise either.
been, a bomb went off or a hurricane devastated my hometown or I was molested at night. So surprise can be very triggering. And so there are ways that you have to come in and really be trauma responsive. And, again, see the person not coming in as like this person who has power over you and we're going to coerce you and,
Right.
force you to go because we're going to take everything away from you. I mean, that's re-traumatizing someone. But to really come in from that place of mutuality where there's respect, we're in this together, families in there, they've got things that they're working on that that they're going to be that are acceptable and aren't. And one of those is that they can't sit around and watch you hurt yourself anymore. And we need to go get help. And here's what help's going to look like. And here's what you can expect. And here's some choices for you to make, but that there's hope and we love you and we're coming from that place of deep love and concern. And we're learning as a family how to react differently and do things differently because the things we've done, even though out of love, haven't worked and haven't been helpful.
No, that's good. And that's something you touched on that I'm going to be really driving home on this podcast called Connect Call. Big reason why I wanted to do it is as many great helpers are out there. There's a lot of not so great helpers or wannabe helpers out there that aren't licensed, who
Right.
aren't trained, who, with all due respect, are Harry from the recovery meeting, who's now an interventionist. And why I work with professionals like yourself is I take this very seriously. And I'm not just going to send in Tom, Dick, and Harry in for especially in an, an an intervention where we're dealing with mental health, or I'm not going to hire any transport to transport, and we'll talk about that more as well. We've just seen it time and time again, and especially these cases are getting more and more complex, that you really have to do your due diligence and really, and that's why I hope people will look at shows like this, or, find the helpers or the people that they can trust to ask for referrals instead of, which I hate, parents, don't go online and just start looking, you know? Try to find a trusted professional that you can ask for referrals because, again, there's a lot of interventionists out there, but there's very few like yourself that are really credentialed to do this work, and it can really go left and really badly.
Well, and what I
So,
can tell you having, so I have a undergrad degree in psychology. I have a master's degree in psychology. I've taken multiple trainings. I'm licensed.
right,
And intervention is not an entry level position. And so it is terrifying to me that that's a lot of people's entries into this world, that they take this shortcut, that they go and take a 2-day training and suddenly they're an interventionist. Because intervention is done, if done properly, you are responsible for every person in that room. It's not about just going in and coercing somebody and getting them to go to treatment. And when you're looking at mental health, I mean, my personal belief is that no one without a clinical degree, being a master's degree or above, should be working with mental health clients. And I do
I
think it's
agree.
even, I think it's questionable about whether you should work with someone with substance abuse either if you don't have formal training. And
Right,
just because you went through recovery yourself doesn't mean you know how to help others. Everyone's different. If I got arrested, which I haven't, and had a lawyer, it doesn't mean because I've been arrested and had a lawyer, I know how to be an attorney. It doesn't
right,
qualify me for that. Like there's training that goes into it. And if someone doesn't have a license or a clinical degree, there's no recourse. Like if someone does something wrong, does something unethical, there's no place to file a complaint. So it's really like the wild, wild west. And anybody out there can hang up a shingle and call themselves an interventionist. And there's a desperate need for regulation around this because people do get
desperate need for
desperate.
regulation.
Yes, because people get hurt, families get hurt, and we're talking about healthcare. Where else in healthcare do we have non-trained professionals go in I mean, there's peer support. That's different. Peer support is, I've survived cancer. You're going through this. Let me share my experience strength at home. It's not,
Right.
let me tell you where to go for treatment. Let me tell you what's wrong with you. Let me tell you what you need to do. And so there's a big difference there. And so
And I
it's,
and I tell families that with the price point too. I'm like, so and so may be like only a couple $1,000s, but these are the questions you need to be asking. And some other red flags, I'm just going to throw it out there, is if you're working with a treatment center and they're like, "Hey, one of my staff members can be your transport or your interventionist."
questionable ethics.
Yeah,
That's
very questionable.
questionable ethics. Yeah.
And it's also, again, I've come across some colleagues over the past 18 years that are doing transports or maybe doing some interventions that I don't think are licensed, are not ready to, I mean, it's such a, I wouldn't, it's such a, like you said, you're taking on someone's life and the family's lives. And it's just, I don't think people realize how major that is. It's like going into surgery and, saying, well, I got my certificate in biology and you know what I mean? It's just
Yeah.
so,
Right.
thank you. And I really just want to stress that, and I will stress this through this whole show, is really to give families really viable steps on how to find the good guys and the credible guys and the licensed people that can really be helpful.
I think it's a big red flag for me is when people put an alphabet soup after their name. You know,
Totally,
so because there are all
totally.
kinds of certifications you can get. There are all kinds of places you can go for a 2-day certification, often online, which means, you sit, you listen, You maybe take a little test at the end and suddenly you've got a certification. And it does not qualify you. It maybe educated you, but there's no supervision. And so I'm always wary of people who I put my clinical degree, my graduate degree, I put my license, and that's really about it. Sometimes I put CIP, which is Certified Intervention Professional, but because the biggest thing I have is my LPC, Licensed Professional Counselor, and my master's degree. So if someone has all this other, it's just confusing. It's not more is better.
Or I find people are lying on their websites. Like, I had some counselor in Florida once say he was a PhD and this and that, and I looked him up and he wasn't. So I guess
someone just sent me a link before this call and said, "Have you heard of this person?" And I said, I haven't, but I find it interesting that they call themselves a school psychologist, but they don't have a PhD.
Right.
So if you look at most states and you look at the American Psychological Association, you can't call yourself a psychologist if you don't have a PhD or a PsyD.
Yeah, I've run into that.
So again, those are a lot of, red flags. People calling themselves counselors or saying they have counseling services when they don't have a degree and they're not licensed as a counselor. You can't even put MSW after your name if you have a master's in social work and you're not licensed.
Right.
That is against their ethical code.
I guess to keep things simple for families, what are just a couple go-to thoughts about how to weed out the good and the bad, and what are some things for a family to look at? I mean, I know we said about the credentials and definitely but when families are doing their due diligence and asking these firms or individuals, some questions, can you think of a one or two that might really be able to weed out, I guess, with
Do you have graduate school training?
right?
Do you have licenses, state licenses? What is your background?
Should they show the state licenses?
Well, you can always, if someone says they have it, you can always look it up on the state website.
There you go.
And I think another great question is, do you have other family members that you've worked with that we can talk to?
Yes,
Do you have
testimony.
references? Yeah.
Yes, I love testimony.
Yes.
There's no better
Right.
way of finding out. And I say this, and it
Let
seems
me
like
talk to treatment centers you've worked with.
what?
Not let me talk to treatment centers you've worked with for a reference, but families that you've worked with. See, what's
Right,
important is that our clients are our families and that we don't
right,
miss that. And we make the best decisions we can for our families because we work for them.
right,
That's ethics, across the board in healthcare.
right,
If a doctor owns an ambulance company as well, and every one of his patients leaves his office in an ambulance, then do they need to go in an ambulance, or did he want to make money from it for his ambulance company?
right,
You've got a connection, particularly a financial connection to a treatment center, then again, the ethical dilemma, besides the fact that it's now illegal and goes against the anti-patient brokering laws in most states, is that, and federally, is that it
I love you, Heather.
clouds your ability to make a good decision for your family. If
Right,
I have three facilities I can send them to, and one of them, you know, pays me or gives me big gifts, am I really going to pick the right one, or I'm going to pick the one that pays
right.
the right gifts? Which
My ex was a concierge at a really big hotel, and I would joke with her and say, how do people trust you? You're getting paid by the restaurants to speak on their names. And it's kind of this, it's not the same, but the way you need to look at it is especially when I was dealing with young adults and we were dealing with college kids, right? I'd always say to the mom and dad and the parents and the family, this is a lot of money to go to school, right? So you did your due diligence, you
Right.
did a tour,
Right.
you looked the ins and outs of that because this is a big check you're about to write.
Right.
And so I'm asking you to do that kind of same thing with treatment. And so a lot of times I watch, and I'll also stress this, and I'm sure you will too, never do your due diligence, or hopefully don't do it in crisis, because then there's this urgency to get this figured out in a day. And a lot of times rarely see that work out for
Yeah,
everybody.
right. And, the other thing is that like reviews, like how do you do that due diligence? How do you know what questions to ask? Like reviews can be very confusing. And I know the Federal Trade Commission has been doing a lot of work with healthcare to look at that. Like you can buy positive reviews for yourself, you can buy negative reviews for other people. So it's not just
Can you?
treatment. Yes, it's not just treatment. It's, medical care. Who's the best surgeon? Who's the best veterinarian? And so if you're dependent on all those reviews, I mean, often they're faulty, false reviews. So the Federal Trade Commission is really trying to look at how they can put a stop to this. There's
Or
an incredible number, and I forgot what it was, but it's in the billions of money on healthcare that is spent in ways that it shouldn't have been because of those, reviews that are not genuine and authentic.
wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I know when I worked for adolescent programs or young adult programs, I used to not laugh, but the bulk of the reviews were disgruntled clients while they were in
Or
treatment.
employees, former employees, there's that.
Yeah. And like, whenever I got a parent, they're like, your reviews aren't great. I go, well, I'm telling you right now, it's typically the client, leaving the review. And the best thing is, and we used to offer the same thing. Let's talk to some families who we've had great outcomes with. Okay. And we would try to connect again, a family from the same area of the country or whatever. And that is the best,
Right,
best way to really
right.
hear from that you're doing the good work.
Well, and often we'll even connect them with families where their loved one didn't go to treatment right away. So
Right.
also
Right.
talk about how were they supported? How did it eventually happen? What did we as a team do to help them navigate a difficult intervention and things that didn't go as planned, but then ended up with a better ending than than we started with.
It's good too.
Yeah,
And, I guess I always also, I understand a lot of the calls I get. People may not have the resources, right? And they may not have the resources to maybe hire an interventionist like
right,
yourself. And so I guess I always try to and want to be able to give steps and tools to those families that financially or maybe cannot do this, but really want to get their loved one into treatment. And so I guess my next and last question really is, two parts. One, we always hear families need to do their work and, for this to kind of work. And I guess the other piece of that is for those families that, speak to you and are not able to hire you, what are some not all my families love Al-Anon, and I get that. But like, what are some support groups or books or steps that you can maybe offer them if they're not able to, so we can give them something,
right, right. SAMHSA's got a website that goes through and talks about different resources out there. There's power in education and knowledge and having an understanding. So reading books on brain chemistry, reading books on what it's like to be a parent of an addicted child or the spouse of an addicted, husband or wife, and really begin to educate yourself around it. And there are often places where you can get help. I mean, some people have pastoral counselors or rabbis that can help with this and are familiar with resources. But it gets to the bigger issue, which is that we don't have a lot of resources out there for
Right.
people who don't have
Have
insurance
resources.
that'll cover
Right.
or the funds, and that's a big, big problem in the United States. And I think the statistics are like we only, of all those people who have substance use disorder, was it 5%, 10% are able to get help? I mean, if we could even move that to 15%, I mean, think of the
Right.
numbers of people that we'd be helping. And that's one of the things that we should be really looking at is how do we get good, ethical, evidence-based treatment
Right.
out there to those in need who don't have the funds and resources. And sometimes not having the funds and resources also means they have to continue working. So how do we have more ethical, robust, clinically savvy outpatient treatment?
Right.
How do we
And
really
that's
get in support?
an episode I'm definitely going to talk about too as an option
Yeah,
is,
women, childcare, all of that.
right. and just talk about how we can do wraparound, maybe treatment from the outside if we can't do residential, if we can't do this. But I agree with you. It was interesting. I'm actually filming right now from the UK. And if you know about the UK, and I'm a dual citizen, we have the NHS, which is the National Health, is it system or services? I should know this.
National health system.
Thank you. And at times you have to wait for those services. But what I have loved about watching and being a part and living over here sometimes and
Right.
utilizing them is
Right.
like, for instance, I was talking to one of the executives from actually NHS, and I was working with a program where we were treating physicians, right? And pharmacists and all that, and dentists. And I was asking them, like, what is their process with their professionals when they get into trouble? And it blew me away that this woman told me that, oh, well, they get offered 3 residential stays at first. And if they don't do well with that, and that's free cost, residential treatment, then we'll look to outside sources. And so the government and the taxes and everything, but they have come up with this system, and it's just, and so I definitely, I mean, I can get on a soapbox all day long about issues that we have in our country with funding cuts and all that with mental health, or, it's a mental health issue, not a gun issue, but we're not doing anything to support mental health,
Right. Right.
And
Or, cutting back on Narcan, that's being, provided
really,
there. And yeah.
it's so, but
Yeah.
I want to say definitely thank you for being on the show. I've always, and I still do, Heather, I barely, make a move without checking with you first on everything. And I've just always looked up to you over the years. And, we're very lucky in this industry to have professionals like yourself,
Love, love, love having you as a good friend. And I love having you as a professional. And we have a lot of fun together.
We
And
do.
we also anguish a lot about things that could be done differently together. And I'm really glad that you're here helping fight this fight.
Thank you. And thank you all for being on Connect Call tonight. And we'll be seeing you at the next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Connect Call. As we conclude, remember that insights shared are intended for informational and educational purposes only and should not substitute professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. We strongly recommend consulting a qualified medical health professional or healthcare provider for personalized advice tailored to your unique needs. Your mental health journey is important, and having the right support is essential. If you're experiencing a mental health crisis or require immediate assistance, please reach out to a mental health provider or emergency services in your area. We're grateful to have you as part of our community, and your well-being remains our priority. So follow us on social media to stay connected, and be sure to catch one of our episodes on our YouTube channel. We're here to support you every step of the way.